I was sitting in class when the substitute teacher stuck her hand out and said, "Spit out your chewing gum." I laughed nervously but put it in her hand anyway. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor. Her whole body started shaking like she was having a seizure. Multiple people called 911 at once, all yelling over each other. "Get the nurse! Get help! Somebody do something!" I just sat there frozen, pinching myself to see if I was in a fever dream. The nurse burst in with an EpiPen. "Her throat's closing up." She jabbed it into Mrs. Pierce's thigh. Kids started backing away from my desk, and Ella grabbed my arm hard. "What did you do?" "Nothing, I just spit out my gum." Someone behind me whispered, "Murderer." The paramedics arrived and immediately put on double gloves before approaching me. One paramedic kept asking if she'd been stung by something or if anyone saw her take medication. They checked her arms and neck for bug bites. I kept saying she just asked about my gum, but he looked at me like I was wasting his time with irrelevant information. They wheeled her out, and her body was still twitching. "Nobody else touch anything this student touched. We need to isolate the source." One paramedic got in my face. "Have you been feeling sick? Any rashes?" "No, I feel fine, why?" They took my temperature anyway and checked my throat. Everyone watched like I was some kind of alien. The principal rushed in, and his eyes locked on me immediately. "Get all the other students out now." He nodded to the security guard. "Watch the door." "Sir, I don't understand what's happening. She just asked me to spit out. We need to contact your parents immediately." The vice principal leaned in and pointed at me, whispering, "Is this the one who vandalized?" They started photographing me from multiple angles. I tried to cover my face, but they told me to put my hands down. They took fingerprints from my desk with actual crime scene equipment. "Where did you get this gum?" the principal demanded. 7-Eleven? Is this even regulation gum? What does that even mean?" They ignored me and sent someone to check my other classes for more gum. The lunch ladies were brought in. "What did this student eat today?" "They sat alone at lunch," one said, like that was criminal. "Didn't wash hands before eating." "I used hand sanitizer." They pulled up my entire lunch purchase history on a laptop. "Has this student ever brought outside food?" My hands started shaking. "The superintendent's on his way," someone announced. "Pull up the student's disciplinary file." 3 tardies this semester," the secretary read. "Failed to turn in health forms." "Those were excused. My mom—" The school resource officer cut me off. "Your parents better have good insurance. This is assault with a deadly weapon." "What weapon?" "It was Trident watermelon gum. We'll need a full toxicology report." He was actually writing this down like I was a criminal. Someone mentioned Miranda rights. I felt like I was going to throw up. Through the office window, I could see parents gathering in the parking lot. Someone was passing around a clipboard, a petition. I sat in that office for 2 hours, while Mrs. Pierce's heart rate stabilized. Nobody would tell me anything. Every time I asked what was happening, they'd exchange looks and say, "Just wait." The principal kept asking what I'd eaten for lunch. It seemed like such a weird question when our substitute just almost died, but I told him. PB&J, apple, cookies. He wrote it all down and made a phone call to someone. 2 hours later, a woman burst through the door. It was Mrs. Pierce's daughter. The principal tried to explain what happened, but she cut him off. "You committed murder of a school employee." "What?" "I didn't. My mother has a severe peanut allergy." Her voice shook with rage. "It's in her file in red ink." My stomach dropped through the floor. She could have died. One particle can trigger anaphylaxis. The pieces clicked horribly into place. My peanut butter and jelly lunch. The gum after. I was suspended immediately. "Effective right now," the principal said, not meeting my eyes. Security escorted me out past the mob of parents. I figured that was it, but I was wrong. A week later, the college rejection letters started piling in. Every teacher who promised to write my recommendation letters mysteriously pulled out at the last minute. Then my mom's car tires were slashed. All 4. The final straw came when I got a call from my part-time job. Fired. Just like that. Everything traced back to the Pierce family. They'd ruined my life over peanut butter. Time to show them what real destruction tasted like. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down every way I could hurt them back, my pen pressing so hard it tore through the paper on some words. First idea was to slash their tires like they did to my mom's car, but that was too simple, too quick. Then I wrote about spreading rumors at their church, posting flyers around town with their lawsuit history, maybe even calling their insurance company with an anonymous tip about fraud. My hand cramped from writing, but I kept going, filling page after page with plans that got darker as the night went on. I thought about sugar in their gas tank, dead fish in their mailbox, signing them up for every spam list on the internet. Around 3 in the morning, I had 20 pages of ideas, but none of them felt big enough to match what they'd done to me. The next morning, I couldn't sleep anymore, so I got in my car and drove past their house just to see it. Mrs. Pierce lived in one of those perfect suburban houses with the white fence and the garden gnomes, and her daughter's silver Honda was parked in the driveway with that stupid bumper sticker about her kid being an honor student at the elementary school. I slowed down enough to see their recycling bin was full of wine bottles, and their lawn was starting to go brown in patches. The curtains were still closed even though it was past 9, and I noticed they had one of those security company signs in their yard, probably new since the incident. I drove around the block 3 times, memorizing every detail, where the streetlights were, which houses had dogs, whether there were any cameras visible. Then I headed to the library because I needed to be smart about this. Couldn't use my own computer or internet for what I was planning. The library had those old computers in the back that nobody ever used, perfect for creating fake Facebook and Twitter accounts without leaving a trail back to me. I made 5 different profiles using random photos from stock image sites, gave them basic backstories about living in town for years, started following local business pages and community groups to make them look real. Each account had a different personality, but they all had one thing in common. They were going to start asking questions about the Pierce family. My first posts were careful, nothing too obvious, just innocent questions in the town Facebook group about whether anyone else had noticed how the Pierce family always seemed to get their way with the school board. Within an hour, 3 people had commented with their own stories about Mrs. Pierce throwing fits at PTA meetings when the bake sale couldn't accommodate her allergies, demanding special treatment at every school event, making other parents feel bad for bringing normal snacks to class parties. One mom said Mrs. Pierce had threatened to sue when her kids' birthday cupcakes were brought to the school, even though her daughter wasn't even in that class. I screenshotted everything and kept digging, using the library's access to public records databases that most people didn't know existed. That's when I found the gold mine. 3 separate lawsuits filed by Mrs. Pierce against local businesses in the past 5 years, all claiming negligent allergen exposure, all settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. There was the ice cream shop that had to pay out when she claimed cross-contamination, the bakery that settled after she said they didn't properly label their items, and even a lawsuit against the movie theater for serving Peanut M and Ms. The pattern was so obvious once you looked for it, they'd find a business, claim exposure, threaten to go public, then settle quietly. My phone buzzed with a Facebook message to one of my fake accounts from someone named Lance Crawford, who said he was a journalist with the local paper and had seen my posts about the Pierce family. He wanted to know if I had any more information about these lawsuits, said he'd been hearing rumors for years, but nobody would go on record. I was careful with my response, told him I'd just noticed some patterns in public records, and thought it was interesting how often they seemed to end up in legal disputes. I sent him the case numbers for the lawsuits, but didn't give him anything that could trace back to me, let him do his own digging and draw his own conclusions. 3 days later, I was at the grocery store buying milk when I heard 2 moms in the next aisle talking about whether peanut allergies were even real or just parents being dramatic for attention. One of them mentioned seeing something online about the Pierce family's lawsuit history, wondered out loud if maybe some people used allergies as a way to get at money from businesses. I pulled out my phone and posted from another fake account, a simple question asking if anyone else thought it was weird how many businesses in town had been sued for allergen exposure by the same family. The comments started flooding in within minutes, people sharing stories I hadn't even heard yet, connecting dots I hadn't seen. My mom walked into my room that night and saw me hunched over my laptop, asked what I was working on so intensely. The lie came out smooth and easy, told her I was researching community colleges since all my first choices had rejected me, looking at programs that might still accept late applications. She rubbed my shoulder and said she was proud of me for not giving up, that the Pierce family couldn't keep me down forever, and I felt sick about lying, but also weirdly proud of how good I'd gotten at it. My phone lit up with a text from Ella, saying she'd been thinking about what happened and something didn't feel right about the whole thing. She wanted to meet at the coffee shop tomorrow to talk, said she had some things she wanted to tell me about what she'd heard after I was suspended. Part of me thought it might be a trap, maybe the Pierce family sending her to get information about what I was doing, but another part hoped maybe she was starting to see the truth. I texted back that I'd meet her at 2 o'clock, already planning my escape routes in case things went bad. The next day, I got to the coffee shop early and sat where I could see both exits, watched Ella walk in looking nervous and guilty. She sat down across from me and immediately started apologizing for grabbing my arm that day, said she'd been caught up in the panic and didn't think straight. She told me she'd been noticing things since then, how the Pierce family seemed to have a lot of power in town, how Mrs. Pierce's daughter had bragged about getting me fired from my job, how the whole thing felt planned, somehow. I pulled out my phone to show her the fake accounts I'd been using, but then stopped myself because trusting anyone felt dangerous now. She leaned closer and whispered that Lance Crawford from the local paper had been asking questions around school about the Pierce family. My heart started racing because that meant my posts were actually working. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw it. Lance's article with the headline asking why one family had filed so many allergen lawsuits against local businesses. The comment section went crazy within minutes, with people sharing stories about Mrs. Pierce screaming at the bakery owner last year and her daughter threatening to sue the ice cream shop. I screenshot everything and saved it to multiple folders just in case. My mom came home that night looking tired and asked if I'd seen the article about the Pierce family online. I shrugged and said maybe I'd seen something, but tried to act like I didn't care even though my hands were shaking under the table. The next morning, Mrs. Pierce's daughter posted this long video on Facebook with tears running down her face, talking about how her family was attacked online for no reason. She wore this white shirt that made her look innocent and kept wiping her eyes with tissues while saying they were just trying to protect her mom's health. People in the comments started defending her and calling whoever started the rumors a monster. Some lady named Karen wrote that she hoped they found who was behind the hate campaign and pressed charges. I felt sick watching everyone buy her act when she'd literally destroyed my whole future over an accident. That night, I stayed up until 3 making a new email account and sent Lance all my college rejection letters with the dates circled in red. I included screenshots of my termination email from work and made sure to highlight how everything happened right after the gum incident. I didn't sign it or give any hints about who I was, but I knew he'd connect the dots. 3 days later, Lance published another article mentioning the strange timing of a local student losing college opportunities right after the substitute teacher incident. He was careful not to accuse anyone directly, but he included a timeline that made it pretty obvious what had happened. The Pierce family's supporters started fighting with people who thought something fishy was going on, and the whole town Facebook page turned into a war zone. I was eating breakfast when the phone rang and my mom answered, looking confused. She covered the phone and mouthed that it was the principal, then her face went white as she listened. After she hung up, she sat down across from me and said the principal had warned her about inflammatory online activity that could result in legal action against our family. She asked if I knew anything about it, and I said no, while my stomach twisted into knots. The principal couldn't prove anything, but the threat was clear: back off, or they'd come after us even harder. That afternoon, I texted Ella, asking if she'd heard any news from the school, since I wasn't allowed back. She replied that her friend who worked in the office said Mrs. Pierce was scheduled to start substitute teaching again next week. The thought of her walking those halls teaching other kids while I was banned made my blood boil, so hot I thought my head would explode. I spent the rest of the day pacing my room and punching my pillow because the rage had to go somewhere or I'd lose my mind. Around midnight, I grabbed my dad's old hoodie and drove to the school with a can of spray paint I'd bought weeks ago for an art project. The parking lot was empty and dark with just one security light flickering near the main entrance. My hands shook as I sprayed "allergic to accountability" in huge red letters on the wall where everyone would see it when they arrived. It was stupid and reckless, but seeing those words on that wall felt better than anything had felt in weeks. I drove home with my heart pounding and threw the spray paint can in a dumpster behind the grocery store. The next morning, my phone blew up with texts from people sending me screenshots of the vandalism all over Facebook. The security footage showed a figure in a dark hoodie, but you couldn't see the face or license plate clearly. The principal called an emergency assembly about vandalism and consequences, according to Ella, who texted me updates throughout the day. She said he looked directly at her when he talked about how anyone with information should come forward immediately. Parents started posting about how the school wasn't safe anymore and demanding better security cameras. Some people thought it was funny and true, while others called it criminal property damage that proved someone was out of control. I stayed off social media that whole day and helped my mom clean the house to keep my mind busy. That evening, I got an email from someone named Nadine Vasquez saying she was a lawyer who'd read Lance's articles. She said she believed I might have a case for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress against the Pierce family. She offered to represent me pro bono because she'd dealt with them before in another case and knew their tactics. I Googled her and found she was legit with good reviews and an office downtown. We set up a meeting for the next day at a coffee shop on the other side of town where nobody would recognize us. She showed up wearing a business suit and shook my hand firmly before pulling out a legal pad. I told her everything from the beginning: the gum incident, the suspension, the college rejections, my mom's tires, losing my job, all of it. She took notes the whole time and asked specific questions about dates and documentation. When I finished, she looked me straight in the eye and said we had a strong case, but warned that going legal meant everything would become public. She paused and added that any revenge activities I might have engaged in could complicate things if they came to light. I nodded and tried to keep my face neutral, even though my mind was racing about the spray paint. We agreed to move forward, and she said she'd start preparing the paperwork immediately. 2 days later, I was home alone when I heard a car pull into our driveway. I looked out the window and saw Mrs. Pierce's daughter getting out of her BMW and marching toward our front door. I grabbed my phone and started recording before she even knocked. She pounded on the door, yelling that she knew I was home and we needed to talk right now. I opened the door but stayed behind the screen while keeping my phone recording in my pocket. She pointed her finger at me and said I needed to stop the harassment campaign immediately, or things would get much worse for me and my family. Her face was red, and she kept stepping closer to the door like she might try to come inside. I asked her to leave, but she kept going, saying her mom almost died because of me, and I was lucky they hadn't pressed criminal charges yet. She said they had connections everywhere in town and could make sure I never got into any college or got another job. I kept my voice calm and asked her again to get off our property, while she ranted about how I was ruining their reputation with lies. Finally, she stormed back to her car, yelling that this wasn't over and I'd regret messing with her family. My hands were shaking as I uploaded the video to Facebook that same night. I didn't blur her face or edit anything out. The whole recording showed her pointing at me through the screen door and threatening my family. Within an hour, it had 50 shares and hundreds of comments. People were shocked that a grown woman would go after a teenager like that. Some parents recognized her from the school events and started sharing their own bad experiences with her. The video spread through local Facebook groups, and someone even posted it on the town's Reddit page. By morning, it had thousands of views, and the comments were brutal. People called her a bully and said she should be ashamed of herself for threatening a kid. The principal called my house at 7 a.m., demanding I take it down immediately. I told him no, and hung up. 2 days later, a process server knocked on our door with legal papers. The Pierce family was filing for a restraining order, claiming I was running a harassment campaign against them. The paperwork said I was causing them emotional distress and damaging their reputation. My mom read through it and laughed at the part where they claimed to be victims. We had to appear in court the following week. Nadine met us at the courthouse wearing a sharp black suit and carrying a thick folder of evidence. She'd organized everything perfectly with tabs and labels. The timeline of my college rejections matched exactly with when the Pierce family started their campaign. She had screenshots of the job termination email that came right after the incident. She even had the police report from when my mom's tires were slashed, though they couldn't prove who did it. The judge was an older woman with gray hair who looked tired before we even started. The Pierce family's lawyer went first and painted me as a dangerous student who'd poisoned a teacher and was now stalking the family online. He showed printed screenshots of the fake social media accounts I'd made and tried to connect them to me. Nadine objected and pointed out they had no proof those accounts were mine. When it was our turn, Nadine laid out everything chronologically. She showed how the college rejection started immediately after the suspension. She had emails from my former boss saying he'd been pressured to fire me. She presented the threatening video I'd recorded of the daughter at our house. The judge watched it twice and frowned at the Pierce family's lawyer. After 2 hours of arguments, the judge granted a mutual restraining order, meaning neither side could contact the other. She said both families needed to move on and warned that any violations would result in criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, Nadine told me this was actually good for us because it protected me from further retaliation. That afternoon, Lance called me with huge news. He'd been digging through school records using a Freedom of Information request and found something incredible. The substitute teacher database showed Mrs. Pierce's allergy information was updated 3 days after the incident. The original file from when she first registered as a substitute had no allergy warnings at all. The famous red ink warning wasn't there until after she'd already collapsed in my classroom. Lance had copies of both versions with timestamps proving the change. He was writing an article about it for tomorrow's paper. Nadine practically ran to her car when I told her. She spent the rest of the day preparing our lawsuit against the Pierce family and the school district. The complaint was 40 pages long and alleged negligence on the school's part for not having proper allergy protocols. It accused the Pierce family of defamation and intentional interference with my economic opportunities. She filed it electronically that evening and hand-delivered copies the next morning. The school board called an emergency meeting for that Thursday night. The auditorium was packed with angry parents on both sides. Some supported the Pierce family and said the school needed better safety measures. Others thought the whole thing was blown out of proportion and the school had overreacted. One dad stood up and said if peanut residue was really that dangerous, then the school should ban all peanut products immediately. Another parent pointed out that would punish hundreds of kids for one incident. The arguing got so loud the board president had to call for order 3 times. They voted to table the discussion until their lawyers could review our lawsuit. Meanwhile, things were shifting in town. The daughter's best friend posted on Instagram that she couldn't support someone who would destroy a teenager's future over an accident. She said she'd seen the daughter's vindictive side before, but this was too much. Other people started distancing themselves too. The daughter's book club disbanded when half the members stopped showing up. Her yoga instructor asked her to find a different studio. Even the grocery store clerk, who'd always been friendly, started avoiding eye contact. Then something amazing happened. I got a voicemail from the admissions office at State University saying they were reconsidering my application. They'd received new information about my suspension and wanted to schedule a phone interview. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the first good news I'd had in weeks. My mom cried when I played the message for her. The next day, the Pierce family's lawyer called Nadine with a settlement offer. They would pay for my entire college education if I dropped the lawsuit and signed an NDA preventing me from ever discussing the incident publicly. Nadine said it was a decent offer financially, but warned that taking it meant they'd never admit wrongdoing. She said I should think about whether the money was worth letting them escape accountability. I spent hours going back and forth about what to do. That same week, my mom's boss called her into his office. He apologized for cutting her hours after the incident and admitted he'd been influenced by the gossip around town. He offered her extra shifts to make up for the lost income and gave her a small raise. He said he'd been wrong to take sides without knowing the full story. Mom accepted his apology, but I could tell she didn't fully trust him anymore. The whole town was choosing sides now, and relationships that had lasted years were falling apart over this mess. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning with Nadine's number showing up. She told me to check the news immediately because something happened at the Pierce house overnight. I pulled up the local news site and there it was, a photo of their front porch with a plastic bag sitting by the door. The article said someone left peanuts with a note that said Karma has allergies too, and the family was treating it as a threat. The cops were already at my house by 7 asking where I was last night. I showed them my work schedule and the security footage from my job that proved I was there until midnight. They still acted like I was guilty and said the Pierce family wanted to press charges for harassment. Nadine showed up while they were still questioning me and told them to leave unless they had actual evidence. The whole thing made me look worse, even though I had nothing to do with it. 2 weeks later, Ella got called in for her deposition about the original incident. Nadine let me sit in the room while she testified, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ella admitted she grabbed my arm that day because everyone else was freaking out, and she got caught up in the panic. She said looking back, she realized I was just as confused as everyone else, and she felt bad for immediately blaming me. Her testimony was recorded, and Nadine said it would help our case since Ella was one of the first people to accuse me. The school board met again the following week and finally did something useful. They announced new rules for substitute teachers that required them to submit verified medical documentation about any allergies before they could start working. The principal sent out an email saying this would prevent future incidents, and I wanted to scream that it was too late for me. It was a tiny victory, but at least they admitted their system was broken. Then, I heard through the grapevine that Mrs. M. Pierce was coming back to work, but not at the high school. They assigned her to the elementary school instead, which seemed insane to me. Parents started complaining immediately because little kids eat peanut butter all the time and can't be expected to wash their hands perfectly. The PTA had an emergency meeting where people argued about whether someone that allergic should be around kindergartners at all. My mom came home from the grocery store saying she overheard two moms saying Mrs. Pierce was putting herself in danger on purpose for attention. The anger I'd been carrying around was eating me alive, so I finally agreed to see a therapist. My mom found someone who took our insurance, and I went to my first appointment feeling stupid about the whole thing. The therapist listened to me rant for 20 minutes about how unfair everything was, and then asked me a simple question about what I wanted to happen next. I realized I'd been so focused on revenge fantasies that I wasn't thinking about my actual future. She helped me see that staying angry was keeping me stuck in that classroom where Mrs. Pierce collapsed. We made a plan to work through the trauma, but I still left feeling raw and exhausted. A month later came the worst part, my deposition with the Pierce family's lawyer. Nadine spent hours preparing me, going over every possible question they might ask. The lawyer was this older guy who kept trying to get me to admit I'd vandalized the school or made the online posts about them. I stuck to the truth, that I was angry, but didn't do those things, and he kept pushing and pushing. Nadine objected to half his questions, and we took 5 breaks because I was getting too upset. The whole thing took 6 hours, and by the end I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Lance called me the next week saying his investigation was ready to publish. He'd found 3 other families who had similar experiences with the Pierces, using the allergy to get money or destroy people who crossed them. One family had their small business shut down after Mrs. Pierce claimed they didn't take her allergy seriously at a catered event. Another family's kid got expelled from private school after accidentally bringing trail mix near her. The pattern was clear, and Lance had all the documentation to prove it. The article came out on a Sunday, and by Monday morning it had been shared over 1,000 times. People were finally seeing what I'd been saying all along. The school district's lawyers contacted Nadine that same week with a settlement offer. They would clear my disciplinary record completely and write a letter to all the colleges explaining that my suspension was an overreaction to a medical emergency. They also offered a small cash settlement for the damage to my education. Nadine said it wasn't everything we wanted, but it would help fix my college applications. I wanted them to admit more fault, but she reminded me that getting my record cleared was the most important thing. We were still negotiating when the next disaster happened. Mrs. Pierce had another allergic reaction at the elementary school when a 5-year-old hugged her after lunch. The kid had eaten a peanut butter sandwich and hadn't washed his hands. This time, people weren't as sympathetic, because everyone was asking why she kept putting herself in these situations. The parents at the elementary school started a petition to have her transferred somewhere else. My old boss from my part-time job called that afternoon. He said he'd read Lance's article and realized he'd been pressured by the Pierce family's threats about lawsuits. He offered me my job back with all the back pay I'd missed. I needed the money for college, so I said yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just covering his own ass. The trust between us was completely gone, and going back to work. There felt like admitting defeat somehow. 3 weeks later, we were all sitting in a conference room at some law office downtown for the mediation. The room had this huge table, and everyone looked uncomfortable being there. Mrs. Pierce sat across from me with her daughter right next to her, and their lawyer on the other side. Nadine had warned me this would be tough, but I wasn't ready for what happened next. About an hour into going over all the documents and evidence, Mrs. Pierce just started crying. Not quiet tears either, but full-on sobbing while her daughter tried to shush her. "I never wanted any of this to happen," she kept saying between sobs. Her daughter grabbed her arm hard and told her to stop talking, but Mrs. Pierce kept going anyway. "This whole thing got out of control, and I'm so sorry." Her daughter's face turned red, and she whispered something harsh that made Mrs. Pierce stop talking completely. The mediator called for a break, and that's when I realized who was really running this whole revenge campaign against me. During the break, Nadine pulled me aside to show me something on her laptop. She'd been digging into court records from other states and found 3 different lawsuits filed by Mrs. Pierce's daughter in the past 5 years. Each one was for harassment or defamation against people who'd supposedly wronged her mother. The pattern was so obvious once you saw it all laid out. They'd move to a new town, find someone to target when something went wrong, get money through threats or lawsuits, then move again. One family in Ohio had their bakery almost shut down after Mrs. Pierce claimed they didn't take her allergy seriously. Another case in Michigan involved a teacher who got fired after accidentally bringing almonds to a staff meeting. Nadine had printed everything out, and when we went back into the mediation room, she slid the papers across the table. Their lawyer's face went white when he saw it all. The mediator spent the next 2 hours going through everything, and finally said what we all knew was coming. He recommended the Pierce family pay for my college costs, plus damages for the lost job and other stuff, but they wouldn't have to admit they did anything wrong legally. It made me so mad that they could destroy my life and just write a check to make it go away. Nadine squeezed my hand under the table and reminded me that going to trial would take years and might not end any better. The meeting ended with them saying they needed time to think about it. I spent the next 4 days barely sleeping and going back and forth about what to do. My mom sat with me at the kitchen table going through all the pros and cons over and over. She kept reminding me that my future was more important than making them admit what they did. "You can rebuild your life with that money," she said. "Or you can spend years fighting and maybe get nothing." She was right, but it still felt wrong to let them buy their way out of this. On the 5th day, Nadine called to say they'd agreed to the settlement but wanted a full NDA, so I could never talk about what happened. That was their final offer, and if we didn't take it, they'd fight us in court forever. I told Nadine, absolutely not. If I took their money, I at least wanted people to know the basic facts about what really happened. We went back and forth for another week with lawyers arguing about every little detail. Finally, their lawyer admitted that going to trial would be worse for them because all the evidence about their past lawsuits would become public record. They agreed to the settlement with no NDA on the basic facts, just couldn't share the settlement amount or their personal information. The check came through 2 weeks later, and when I saw the amount, I actually felt sick. It was enough for 4 years of college, plus living expenses, plus extra for all the damage they'd caused. My mom cried when she deposited it because she'd been so worried about how we'd pay for college after everything that happened. The money sat in that account feeling dirty, like I'd sold out somehow, but it was also my only chance at the future they'd tried to steal from me. A week after that, 2 of the colleges that had rejected me sent new letters. The school district had finally sent out their letter explaining that my suspension was an overreaction to a medical emergency and shouldn't be held against me. One was my dream school 3 states away, and the other was local. I picked the one farthest from this town without even thinking twice. I needed to go somewhere nobody knew this story, where I could just be a normal college student instead of the kid who almost killed a teacher with peanut butter. The same day I accepted the college offer, Mrs. Pierce's daughter posted another video online trying to play victim one last time. She talked about how her family was persecuted and forced to pay money they didn't have, but this time the comment section destroyed her. People had seen Lance's articles and knew about their history of lawsuits. Someone posted screenshots of the other families they'd targeted. Another person found records showing they weren't poor at all, but had plenty of money from all their previous settlements. Within 3 hours, she deleted the video, but screenshots were everywhere. 2 days later, she posted that they were moving to another state for a fresh start because of all the harassment they'd faced here. Good riddance. Graduation day came faster than expected, and the principal had called to say I was allowed to walk with my class despite everything. My mom helped me iron my cap and gown the night before, and we didn't talk about how different this day was supposed to be. When they called my name, some people clapped while others stayed silent. A few parents actually booed, but I kept my head up and walked across that stage knowing I'd survived everything they'd tried to do to me. I shook the principal's hand even though part of me wanted to refuse, took my diploma, and walked off that stage finally free from that place. The next week, there was an awards ceremony for local journalism, and Lance won first place for his investigation into the Pierce family. In his acceptance speech, he thanked a brave young person who refused to be silenced without saying my name. He held up that award and said sometimes the truth takes time to come out, but it always finds a way. I watched the live stream from my room while packing for college and actually smiled for the first time in months. The next morning, my mom and I took the settlement check to the auto shop to finally fix her car the right way. The mechanic showed us the damage from the slashed tires and said whoever did it used a box cutter based on the cut patterns. My mom didn't say anything about it, but I saw her jaw tighten when she signed the repair order. We used part of the settlement money, and she kept the receipt in a folder she labeled evidence, even though we both knew we'd never need it again. That same week, Ella started texting me and asked if I wanted to grab coffee after school. I met her at the Starbucks near campus, and she told me how watching me fight back against the Pierce family made her realize she'd been letting people walk all over her too. She'd finally reported the girls who'd been stealing her lunch money since freshman year, and they got suspended. We started hanging out more, and she helped me pack for college while telling me about her own plans to study nursing. She said that day in class when Mrs. Pierce collapsed, taught her she wanted to help people in medical emergencies, instead of just standing there frozen. I drove past the Pierce house one afternoon and saw the for sale sign had been up. So long it was starting to fade. The realtor told my mom at the grocery store that nobody wanted to buy it after everything that happened. People in town called them the lawsuit family now, and nobody wanted that bad energy in their house. I spent 3 days writing my college essay about the whole mess and how it taught me that injustice can happen to anyone, but fighting back matters more than winning. The admissions counselor emailed me later, saying it was one of the strongest essays she'd read that year, and it showed real character growth. A letter came from Mrs. Pierce 2 weeks before graduation, and I could tell her lawyer wrote it because it used words like regrettable incident and unintended consequences. She said she was sorry for how things escalated, but never actually admitted they went too far. I kept the letter in my desk drawer as a reminder that some people will never really take responsibility. The school sent out an email about new mandatory allergy training for all staff and students starting next year. Kids started calling it the Pierce Protocol when teachers weren't around, but nobody said it to their faces. They made everyone watch a video about cross-contamination and how to use an EpiPen, and the principal announced zero tolerance for food bullying. My last week in town, I had to drive past their house to get to the bank and saw a moving truck in the driveway. Workers were loading boxes and furniture, while Mrs. Pierce stood on the lawn directing them. I didn't feel happy or sad or angry, just empty where all that rage used to live. 3 months later, I was at freshman orientation, listening to the residence life coordinator talk about roommate agreements. Nobody knew who I was or what happened, and I liked it that way. When people asked where I was from, I just said a small town and changed the subject. My roommate showed up on move-in day and immediately told me he had a severe tree nut allergy. I helped him check every food item I'd brought and threw out anything that might have been processed near nuts. We put up signs on our door and established a whole system for keeping him safe because I knew how serious allergies were, but also knew they shouldn't be used as weapons. He was grateful I took it seriously without him having to explain why it mattered. We became good friends, and he never knew about my history with allergy-related drama. Nadine texted me in October saying the Pierce family was investigated for insurance fraud in their new state. Someone had tipped off the authorities about their pattern of lawsuits and settlements. She swore it wasn't her, but said she wasn't surprised someone finally connected the dots. The investigator had called her for information about our case, and she'd provided all the documentation showing their history. I asked if I needed to do anything, and she said no, just focus on the school and let karma handle the rest. My mom visited for Parents' Weekend and mentioned the town was different now. People had learned something from what happened, even if they didn't want to talk about it directly. The school had better policies, and parents were more careful about not turning accidents into vendettas. She said the Pierce house finally sold to a young family who got it for way under asking price. The new owners didn't know the whole story, and my mom didn't tell them. That winter break, I ran into the principal at Target, and he stopped me near the electronics section. He said he was sorry for how he handled everything, and that he should have investigated more before suspending me. I told him it was done and I was doing fine at college, but I didn't forgive him. Some things change you, and some bridges stay burned, and that's okay. My college friends eventually found out pieces of the story when someone Googled my name and found Lance's articles. They couldn't believe something so small turned into something so destructive, but they also said they were impressed I fought back and won. One of them said if that happened to her, she would have just given up. But I told her you don't know what you'll do until someone tries to destroy your whole future over nothing. Parents' Weekend came up in October, and my mom drove 6 hours to visit me at college. We walked around campus, and she kept looking at other families, and then told me the town was different since everything happened. Nobody really talked about it directly, but people had learned something from watching how fast things got out of control. The school changed their policies, and parents were more careful about not turning every little thing into a huge fight. She said the Pierce house finally sold to a young couple who got it cheap because nobody else wanted it. I showed her around the dorms and introduced her to my roommate, who she liked right away. We went to the dining hall, and she noticed how I checked every food label carefully now, and how I always washed my hands twice before eating anything. That night after she left, I sat at my desk filling out the paperwork to declare my major. I wrote pre-law on the form and thought about Nadine and how she fought for me when nobody else would. I wanted to be like her and help other people who got caught up in someone else's mess. The advisor asked why pre-law, and I told her I'd seen how the legal system could destroy someone or save them, and I wanted to be on the saving side. She signed my forms and said I'd need to keep my grades up for law school, which I already knew. I threw myself into studying and joined the debate team and mock trial club. My phone buzzed one night the next year with a message from Ella. She said Mrs. Pierce's daughter got arrested for harassment in their new town in Arizona. Someone there was ready for their tricks and had recorded everything from day one. The woman had tried the same thing with another family, but this time, the police weren't buying it. Ella sent me the news article, and I read it 3 times before I believed it was real. The pattern had continued, but finally someone stopped them. I didn't feel happy exactly, but more like the universe had finally balanced itself out. Second semester, I joined the legal aid clinic on campus that helps students with disciplinary problems. My first case was a freshman who got suspended for something he didn't do, and I helped him gather evidence to appeal. We won his case and got his record cleared, and he thanked me with tears in his eyes. The clinic supervisor said I had a natural ability to see through administrative BS and find the real story. More students came to me for help, and I realized my horrible experience actually gave me skills other people needed. Winter break came, and I was at the grocery store buying stuff for dinner when I turned the corner and almost ran my cart into the principal. He froze when he saw me, and then started apologizing right there by the frozen vegetables. He said he was sorry for rushing to judgment and that he was just trying to protect the school from getting sued. His hands were shaking, and he kept saying he should have investigated more before suspending me. I listened to him talk for 5 minutes straight without interrupting. When he finally stopped, I told him I was accepted his apology, but I didn't forgive him. Some bridges are supposed to stay burned, and that was a lesson I learned the hard way. He nodded and walked away, and I never saw him again after that. Back at the school, my friends were hanging out in my room when someone Googled my name for fun and found Lance's articles. They read the whole story out loud and kept stopping to ask if it was really true. They couldn't believe something so small turned into something so huge and destructive. One girl said she would have just given up if that happened to her, but I told her you don't know what you'll do until someone tries to take everything from you. They said they were impressed I fought back and won instead of letting them destroy me. The story spread through our friend group, and people started coming to me for advice about their own problems with unfair treatment. 3 years passed, and I was sitting in my law school orientation, listening to the dean talk about justice and advocacy. The firm that sponsored my full scholarship specialized in defamation cases, and they'd recruited me specifically because of my background. My supervising attorney said the Pierce family had accidentally given me the perfect origin story for this kind of law. I was going to spend my career turning injustice into justice one case at a time and help people who got steamrolled by someone with more power. The girl sitting next to me asked why I chose defamation law, and I told her it chose me when I was 17, and someone tried to ruin my life over peanut butter. She laughed, thinking I was joking, but then saw my face and realized I was serious. That's when I knew I'd found my calling, and the Pierce family's attempt to destroy me had actually created exactly who I was supposed to become. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you. It's been a ride just wondering together. Until next time, take care out there. Like the video, it helps more than you think.
I begged my husband to come support me during chemo. When he finally did, he brought a woman I'd never seen before. This is my new girlfriend. She'll be taking over when you're gone. The treatment room went silent as 12 patients whipped their heads around. Brooke has been incredible at supporting me through this hard time for us, he said. The woman wearing my missing Christmas earrings smiled. Peters told me so much about you. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The nurse found her voice first. Sir, this is a treatment room. Family only. But Brooke is family. He squeezed her hand. Or will be. Soon. When the inevitable finally happens. He checked his watch. We can't stay. Brooke has a showing at 2. Just wanted you two to meet. They left before I could form words. Before I could ask why. That night, alone in our bed while Peter was working late, everything clicked. It wasn't just an affair. You see, Brooke was the realtor from his office that he'd mentioned months ago. Her husband was deployed overseas, and Brooke was looking for an apartment for when her husband came back. Peter started staying late, the same month she started going to viewings. And as soon as I got diagnosed, Peter started asking me for money. Suddenly, his cousin's kids had cancer and needed $2,000 per month. He knew I'd recently inherited money. So right after chemo, when I was too exhausted to even think, he'd hand me the withdrawal slips to sign. I put everything together and came to the conclusion that $2,000 was their rent money. Peter and Brooke had moved in together the day I got diagnosed. 2 days later, I was back in the treatment chair when a man in an ironed suit arrived. Brooke Mitchell? He asked coldly. That's me. He put a stack of papers into my hand. Your husband is petitioning for your medical power of attorney. I'm here on his behalf. I looked down at the papers. He's claiming my brain is too damaged to make my own medical decisions. My voice cracked. You know he'll stop my treatment and let me die? Why are you helping him? I asked, tears filling my eyes. The lawyer just shrugged. Just business, I guess. That's when my phone rang. It was Peter. What are you doing? My voice coming out through choked sobs. You and Brooke? You're dying anyway. He cut me off. His tone was patient, like he was explaining basic math to a child. I just want me and you to both suffer less. But I'm responding to treatment, I said while crying. Doctors say my numbers are... Doctors just say that to keep you paying them for longer. Anyways, you should be grateful I haven't abandoned you completely. This is harder on me, you know, watching you deteriorate. I could hear traffic. He was driving. At least you get to rest soon. I have to live with this trauma forever. If you really loved me, you'd see how much I need Brooke's support right now. He was actually positioning himself as the victim. Peter, the lawyers say this is all standard. Don't make this difficult. The line went dead. I was still sobbing when his lawyer, who'd heard everything, told me I had 72 hours to sign it before my husband takes drastic action. The entire treatment room stared at me as he walked away. Some faces had pity, some pure shock. That's when I decided to give my husband what he wants. He got his papers back exactly 72 hours later. He got medical power of attorney, exactly what he wanted. Except there was one thing. The power of attorney was for dental decisions only. And since my teeth weren't getting treated, this was practically worthless. But the best part was I'd mailed it directly to his office, specifically during his partner meeting. I even taped a penny to his envelope, writing, "Buy Brooke something nice," on the front. He had to sit there in front of all his superiors and explain why he wants medical power of attorney over his wife, and why there were hints of an affair between him and an intern. That evening, I got 17 missed calls, but I didn't answer a single one. I was on the attack now. I opened my laptop and started digging. I found out he'd stolen $48,200. I logged into his social media and found his texts to his brother. How long before I can date publicly without looking bad? His Google searches, stage 3 breast cancer life expectancy. I even found out that he'd tried to raise my life insurance 3 separate times, all denied attempts in the last 8 months. All while his social media showed him at cancer support groups, wearing pink t-shirts and donating the money he stole from me to cancer research. My lawyer was in the middle of drafting up divorce papers when the letter came in. I was actually being summoned to court. Peter was petitioning to be given control of all my finances, as if he hadn't stolen enough. When the day of court arrived and I walked in, I noticed a scar on Peter that was never there before. Trial started, and Brooke instantly got on the stand. She sat with her hands folded, practiced concern and tears plastered all over her face. I've been close with the family for 2 years now, she started. Kelly used to be vibrant. She made eye contact with me. But now she's changed. Just last week she threw her medicine in the trash. Peter, she started and cut herself off with a choked sob. Peter has a scar on his neck from when she threw boiling water at him. The entire courtroom gasped. Peter lifted his collar, his own tears forming while he touched the scar. It's true, Your Honor, he added. Even the judge looked disgusted. By the time Brooke was done, they believed they'd won. They didn't realize that chemo wasn't killing just the cancer. It was also killing every part of me that loved Peter. So when I got on the stand, they had no idea what was coming. I took a slow breath and looked straight at the judge. My hands were steady as I opened the folder in front of me. Peter and I were happy until my diagnosis, I explained, keeping my voice calm and clear. Then everything changed overnight when he suddenly needed money for his cousin's sick kids. I pulled out the first document, a stack of bank statements highlighted in yellow. The withdrawals started the exact week I got diagnosed, I said, pointing to the dates. $2,000, every single month. The judge leaned forward in her seat, squinting at the numbers. I watched her eyes move across the page, following the pattern I'd marked. Peter shifted in his chair. I slid the next document across to the clerk who handed it to the judge. This is a lease agreement I found in Peter's email, I said. He and Brooke signed it 2 days after my diagnosis. The rent is exactly $2,000 per month, the same amount he told me his cousin needed for cancer treatment. The judge's eyebrows went up as she read. Peter's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear. Across the room, Brooke was staring at her hands, her face going red. She shifted in her seat like she wanted to disappear. I pulled out the next packet, my heart beating faster but my voice staying level. This is Peter's Google search history from our shared cloud account, I explained. I accessed it before he locked me out. The judge took the papers and started reading. Her face changed as she went down the list. Stage 3 breast cancer survival rate. How long does chemo take to kill someone? Life insurance payout timeline. The courtroom went completely silent. Someone in the back row gasped loud enough that everyone heard it. Peter's face had gone pale, almost gray. I kept going. Next, I have 3 life insurance applications, I said, laying them out one by one. Peter tried to increase my coverage from $100,000 to $500,000. All 3 attempts happened in the months after my diagnosis. All 3 were denied because the insurance companies flagged them as suspicious. I paused and looked at Peter. He never told me about any of these attempts, I said. The judge was writing notes now, her pen moving fast across her notepad. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the courtroom display screen. These are text messages between Peter and his brother, I said. The messages filled the screen and I read them out loud. How long before I can date publicly without looking bad? The treatment is expensive but worth it for the payout. His brother's responses showed they were planning for my death, discussing how to manage appearances afterward. Peter's face went from pale to completely white. His hands were shaking as he gripped the edge of the table. I switched to the next set of images on the screen. These are photos from Peter's social media, I explained. Cancer support groups, pink ribbons, donation checks made out to cancer research. The judge nodded, looking at the images. Then I pulled up the bank records next to them. Every single one of those checks was written from my inheritance account, I said. Without my knowledge. Without my permission. He was donating my grandmother's money to look like a devoted husband while he was stealing from me. The judge's expression had shifted from neutral to something harder, colder. I took another breath and continued. Peter brought Brooke to my chemotherapy treatment, I said. He introduced her as family, which violated the treatment room's family-only policy. I have a written statement from my nurse. I handed the statement to the clerk. It describes how inappropriate and cruel this was, especially given my vulnerable state during treatment. The judge read the nurse's statement, her jaw tightening. Her eyes moved to Peter and the look she gave him was pure anger. I presented the next folder, thicker than the others. These are my medical records, I said. They show my cancer is actually responding well to treatment. My cognitive function is completely normal. I opened to a specific page marked with a tab. Dr. Figueroa's report states that I understand my diagnosis, treatment options, and prognosis perfectly, that I'm making informed decisions about my care. This directly contradicts Peter's claims that my brain is too damaged to make my own decisions. The judge took her time reading through the medical records, flipping pages carefully. I pulled out another document while she read. This is the original medical power of attorney paperwork that Peter tried to get me to sign, I said. It would have given him complete control over all my medical decisions. His lawyer told me I had 72 hours to sign or face drastic action. I looked at the judge. That felt like a threat, I said quietly. Then I showed her the dental-only version I sent back. I explained I wanted to see what he would do when his plan failed. Several people in the courtroom made small sounds, shocked murmurs that rippled through the room. For my final piece of evidence, I pulled up emails on the screen. These are from Peter's work account, I said. I accessed them before he changed all the passwords. The emails showed Peter and Brooke planning trips, discussing furniture for our place, talking about their future together. The dates ran throughout my entire treatment. This proves the affair wasn't just emotional support, I said. It was a full relationship. I scrolled to one specific email and read it out loud. Just a few more months and we can stop hiding. That one was from Brooke. The judge sat back in her chair, looking from the screen to Peter to me. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. I reached into my folder and pulled out a set of photos. These are pictures of Peter's neck scar, I said while handing them to the clerk. The ones Brooke just testified about. I watched the judge examine them closely. Now here's my chemotherapy schedule from the hospital, I continued. The date Peter claims I threw boiling water at him was October 15th. I pointed to the entry on my schedule. I was at a 6-hour infusion appointment that entire day. I arrived at 8 in the morning and didn't leave until after 3. My nurse signed a statement confirming I was there the whole time and that I left exhausted and went straight home to sleep. Peter's lawyer shifted in his seat. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen. I hired a digital forensics expert to examine the scar photo that was submitted as evidence, I explained. The metadata shows this photo was actually taken on September 22nd. I let that sink in for a moment. That's 3 weeks before the date Peter claims the incident happened. The expert confirmed the photo's original date and found evidence it had been edited. The judge leaned forward and looked directly at Peter's lawyer. Counsel, can you explain this discrepancy? His face went red and he opened his mouth but nothing came out. He looked at Peter, then back at the judge. Your Honor, I was not aware of any issues with the photo's date, he finally managed. The judge's expression was cold. She made a note on her pad. I pulled out another document. This is a written statement from my sister Celine, I said. She describes how Peter contacted her 2 weeks ago and asked her to lie in court. He wanted her to say she witnessed me becoming violent and throwing things. Celine refused and told me about his request immediately. That's when I realized how far Peter was willing to go with these false accusations. The statement includes the exact conversation where Peter tried to coach her on what to say. Someone in the back of the courtroom gasped. Brooke was staring at her hands. I opened another folder. These are credit card statements from Peter's personal card, I said. The one he told me he only used for work expenses. I pointed to specific charges highlighted in yellow. Here's a weekend trip to a resort that cost $3,000. The dates match exactly with when Peter told me he was at a work conference. I scrolled through more charges on the screen. Expensive restaurants, hotel rooms, jewelry purchases, all while Peter was telling me we needed to cut costs because of my medical bills. I looked at the judge. That weekend trip happened while I was recovering from a particularly brutal chemo session. I could barely get out of bed. I presented my next set of documents. These are the fake charity documents Peter created for his supposed cousin's kids with cancer, I explained. Made-up names, a fabricated GoFundMe page, the whole thing. My forensic accountant traced every dollar. The money went directly into a joint account that Peter shares with Brooke. I pulled up the bank records on screen. There are no sick cousins, no kids with cancer, just an elaborate lie to steal my inheritance money. Peter was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the screen. I have text messages from friends, I said. Messages where they tell me they wanted to visit. But Peter said I was too sick for company. I scrolled through them slowly. Here's one from my best friend from college saying she tried to visit 3 times, but Peter turned her away at the door. Here's another from my cousin who Peter told I didn't want any visitors. I looked at the judge. I desperately wanted support during treatment. Peter isolated me from everyone who could have helped me or noticed what he was doing. This made it easier for him to control information and steal from me. I opened another file on my laptop. These are calendar entries from Peter's private calendar, I said. The one he thought I couldn't access. I pointed to entries starting 1 week after my diagnosis. Appointments with divorce attorneys. The notes say things like discuss asset protection and timeline for filing. I scrolled through more entries. He was planning to leave me from the very beginning, but he decided stealing from me first would be more profitable. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of the judge writing notes. I clicked to open a video file. Tucker from the hospital patient advocacy office helped me obtain this security footage, I explained. It shows the parking lot outside the treatment center. The timestamp shows the date Peter and Brooke came to my treatment room. I let the video play. Peter and Brooke walked into frame laughing. They stopped by Peter's car and kissed. Not a quick peck, but a long kiss. Then they stood there talking and smiling before walking toward the building. The timestamp proves they planned this whole thing. This wasn't a supportive visit. It was a calculated move to humiliate me in front of other patients. Several people in the courtroom made disgusted sounds. I pulled up emails on the screen. These are from Peter's work account, I said. Emails between him and Brooke discussing my deteriorating condition. I read one out loud. The doctors are too optimistic. We need to take control of the situation ourselves. That's from Peter to Brooke, dated 3 weeks ago. I scrolled to another. How much longer do we have to wait? That's from Brooke. These emails make it clear they were hoping for my death and frustrated that treatment was working. I reached for my final folder. This is my medical journal, I said. I've kept detailed notes throughout my entire treatment. Symptoms, medications, side effects, doctor appointments, treatment responses. Every single entry is clear and organized. I handed the journal to the judge. Dr. Figueroa reviewed it and wrote a letter stating it demonstrates exceptional patient engagement and cognitive function. The judge took her time looking through the pages. I sat back in my chair and waited. Peter's lawyer was whispering urgently to him, but Peter just stared straight ahead. Brooke had tears running down her face, but nobody seemed to care. I reached for my next folder and pulled out a letter from Dr. Figueroa. Peter tried to convince my oncologist to stop my treatment, I explained. He told her I wanted to do natural remedies instead of chemo. Dr. Figueroa's statement says I never expressed any interest in stopping treatment. She refused his request and wrote notes in my medical file about his interference. The judge took the letter and read it carefully while Peter shifted in his seat. I opened my phone and connected it to the courtroom screen. This is a recording I made of Peter's phone call, I said. The one where he told me I was dying anyway. I started recording our conversations after he threatened me with the medical power of attorney because I knew I needed proof. I pressed play, and Peter's voice filled the courtroom. "You're dying anyway," his recorded voice said. "I just want me and you to both suffer less." The recording continued with him positioning himself as the victim and saying how hard this was for him. The judge listened to the full 2 minutes without moving. Her expression got darker as the recording played. Several people in the gallery made disgusted sounds when Peter's voice said he needed Brooke's support. I pulled up bank statements on the screen next. Peter emptied our joint savings account 2 days after I sent him the dental POA, I explained. He took $15,000 in retaliation. My attorney filed an emergency motion to freeze the accounts, but he'd already moved the money to an account with only his name on it. This proves he was willing to leave me without any resources during cancer treatment. The judge wrote more notes while I scrolled through the bank records showing the withdrawals. I switched to my text message screenshots. "These are messages Peter sent to our mutual friends," I said. "He told them I was losing my mind and becoming paranoid and violent. He sent these messages before I could tell anyone what he was doing. Several friends have given statements saying they now realize he was trying to turn everyone against me." I read one message out loud where Peter told his friend I threw things at him and screamed for no reason. None of it was true, but he was building a story to make people think I was unstable. I pulled up a real estate website on the screen. "This is the apartment Peter and Brooke share," I said. Brooke listed it on her own company website. The listing photos show Peter's belongings throughout the apartment. I zoomed in on one photo showing a watch I gave Peter for our anniversary sitting on the nightstand. Another photo showed his favorite chair from our house in their living room. This proves they're not just having an affair, but actually living together as a couple. Brooke's face went completely white as I showed each photo. I opened a document showing our account passwords. "Peter changed every shared password we had the day after I sent the dental POA, I explained. "He locked me out of my own email, cloud storage, and online accounts I'd used for years. He was trying to prevent me from gathering more evidence against him. Fortunately, I'd already downloaded everything I needed before he could stop me." The list showed dozens of accounts where the passwords had been changed on the same day. I held up my grandmother's will next. "This inheritance documentation proves the $48,200 Peter stole was money my grandmother left specifically for my future," I said. "The will states this money is for Kelly's security and dreams. Peter knew how much this inheritance meant to me. He didn't just steal money, but my grandmother's final gift to me." I had to stop talking for a second because my voice cracked. The judge looked at the will and then at Peter with clear anger on her face. I opened a folder of witness statements. "These are from my chemotherapy nurses," I explained. "They describe me as alert, engaged, and making informed decisions about my care. They say Peter's visits were disruptive and his behavior was controlling. Multiple nurses wrote about times Peter tried to speak for me when doctors asked me direct questions. One nurse specifically wrote that she was concerned for my safety and autonomy." The judge read through each statement while Peter's lawyer whispered urgently to him. I pulled up emails on the screen showing Peter's internet searches. These emails show Peter researching financial power of attorney and conservatorship. "In the weeks right after my diagnosis," I said. "He was planning this scheme from the very beginning. He was looking for legal ways to control my money and medical decisions before I even started treatment." One email to a lawyer specifically asks how to prove someone is mentally incompetent. The courtroom went completely silent as people read the emails on the screen. I opened my final piece of evidence for this section. "This is the visitor log from the treatment center," I explained. "It shows Peter came to every single appointment in the first month after my diagnosis. Then his visits dropped off dramatically as my treatment started working and I began improving. He came less and less as it became clear I was responding well to chemo. This completely contradicts his claims of being a devoted caregiver who's suffering through my illness." The log showed exact dates and times proving Peter stopped visiting once it was clear I might survive. I pulled out another folder and opened it to show the bank manager's statement. I explained how Peter went to our bank 3 weeks after my diagnosis and told them I was mentally unfit to manage my own accounts. He asked them to give him sole control over everything, including my inheritance money. The bank manager refused because I'd been in just 2 days before, handling my own business perfectly fine, and she thought his request was suspicious. She filed a report with Adult Protective Services about possible elder abuse, even though I'm only 34 years old. The statement described Peter as aggressive and demanding, insisting I was too sick to think clearly. The judge read the statement carefully while Peter's lawyer flipped through papers looking for something to object to. I held up my next document, a thick packet of test results. "These are my cognitive assessment results from last month," I said. Tucker helped me arrange testing through the hospital after Peter started claiming brain damage. The neuropsychological evaluation tested my memory, reasoning, problem-solving, and decision-making abilities. Every single score came back in the normal to above-average range. There is zero evidence of any brain damage or cognitive problems. The psychologist who tested me wrote that I demonstrated excellent mental capacity and full understanding of my medical and financial situation. I watched Peter's face go red as the judge examined each page of test results. I opened my laptop and turned it toward the judge to show social media screenshots. These are posts from Brooke's accounts, I explained. She called Peter my Peter in the captions and posted photos of their apartment with romantic messages. She tagged the location and wrote things like, "Home sweet home with my love," and "Building our future together." She deleted all these posts right after I sent the dental power of attorney to Peter's office, but I'd already taken screenshots of everything. The posts are dated throughout my entire treatment, starting just days after my diagnosis. This wasn't something that developed recently like they want everyone to believe. One post from 2 months ago shows Peter cooking in their kitchen with the caption, "My man takes such good care of me." I presented the timeline that Valerie helped me create, a large poster board with dates, events, and connections mapped out in different colors. "This shows every major action Peter took against me," I said, "and when each one happened. The pattern is clear. Every time I had good news from my doctors, Peter escalated his attempts to control me. When my tumor markers improved in July, he tried to increase my life insurance that same week. When I responded well to my 3rd chemo session in August, he filed for medical power of attorney 3 days later. When my scans showed the cancer was shrinking in September, he went to the bank claiming I was mentally unfit. He got more desperate every time it looked like I might actually survive." The judge studied the timeline for several minutes, tracing the connections with her finger. I held up a stack of handwritten statements from my neighbors. "These are from the people who live on my street," I explained. 3 different neighbors saw Peter moving belongings out of our house in the middle of the night during my first month of treatment. They saw him loading furniture, boxes, and personal items into a truck at 2 in the morning. One neighbor almost called the police because they thought we were being robbed. Peter was literally emptying our home while I was too sick from chemo to notice what was happening. He took the couch my grandmother gave us, the TV we bought together, even kitchen appliances. My neighbor, Mrs. Gray, wrote that she saw him make 4 trips over 2 weeks, always late at night when he thought no one was watching. I opened another document from my medical file. Peter tried to get Dr. Figueroa to prescribe me anti-anxiety medication and sleeping pills, I said. He called her office claiming I was having panic attacks and couldn't sleep, that I was becoming unstable and needed medication to calm down. Dr. Figueroa refused because when she examined me, I showed no signs of anxiety disorders or insomnia. She suspected he wanted to make me appear mentally unstable to support his incompetence claims. She documented his request in my medical records as inappropriate and concerning. The doctor wrote that Peter's behavior raised red flags about his motives and his respect for my autonomy. I showed the court a letter from my insurance company. "This is about Peter's attempt to list me as disabled on insurance paperwork without my knowledge," I explained. He filled out forms claiming I was unable to work or manage my own affairs due to my cancer treatment. The insurance company has a policy of contacting patients directly to verify disability claims, which is how I found out what he was doing. I told them I'm not disabled and I'm managing my own affairs just fine. They sent me this letter confirming they rejected his claim and noted my statement that the paperwork was filed without my consent or knowledge. I pulled up emails on the screen and several people in the courtroom leaned forward to read them. These are messages between Peter and Brooke discussing how to handle me if I became difficult about the medical power of attorney, I said. They talked about different strategies, including threatening to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. One email from Peter says, "If she fights this, we'll have to claim she's a danger to herself." Brooke replied, suggesting they document any erratic behavior to build a case. Another email discusses getting me declared incompetent through the courts if I refuse to sign over control. Reading these emails out loud made several people in the courtroom look visibly upset, and one woman in the back shook her head in disgust. I presented my employment records next, showing my work schedule and performance reviews. "I've been working part-time throughout my entire treatment," I explained. "I manage projects, meet deadlines, and communicate with clients and coworkers." My boss provided a statement calling me reliable, professional, and fully capable. She wrote that my work quality never declined even during treatment, and that I always informed her in advance when I needed time off for appointments. This directly contradicts Peter's claims that I'm too impaired to function or make decisions. If I can manage a job and professional responsibilities during chemotherapy, I can certainly manage my own medical and financial affairs. I held up my final piece of evidence for this section, consultation notes from 3 different divorce attorneys. "Valerie subpoenaed these records," I said, "and they show Peter met with divorce lawyers starting 1 week after my diagnosis. The notes document what Peter asked about in each consultation. He wanted to know about hiding assets so I couldn't access them in a divorce. He asked about minimizing spousal support payments. He specifically asked whether a terminal illness diagnosis affected divorce settlements, and if he'd be required to pay my medical bills if we separated. These notes prove he was planning his exit strategy from the very beginning while pretending to support me through cancer treatment." One attorney wrote that Peter seemed more concerned about protecting his money than about his sick wife, and that made her uncomfortable enough to decline to represent him. I pulled out my next folder and opened it to show the family isolation evidence. I explained how Peter told my parents and my sister that I didn't want visitors because stress was bad for my treatment. My mom's written statement said she respected what she thought were my wishes and stayed away even though it broke her heart. My dad wrote that he called Peter every week asking to visit, and Peter always said I was too tired or too sick. My sister Celine provided the longest statement describing how Peter told her I specifically asked not to see her because we'd had a fight, which was completely made up. She believed him for 3 months until she finally showed up at my apartment anyway, and found me alone, weak from chemo and desperate for company. That's when she realized Peter had been lying to everyone. I watched several people in the courtroom shake their heads as I read these statements out loud. Peter had cut me off from the people who loved me most during the hardest time of my life. I moved to my financial records next and spread them across the evidence table. I explained that I've been managing my own money throughout my entire treatment, and these records prove it. My bank statements show I pay my rent on time every month, I pay my utilities, I manage my medical bills and insurance claims. My credit score is 780, which is excellent, and I've never missed a single payment on anything. I successfully managed my grandmother's inheritance money and made smart decisions about where to keep it and how to use it until Peter started stealing from it. Every transaction is documented, every bill is paid, every financial choice I made was sound and responsible. This demonstrates exactly the kind of mental capacity Peter claims I don't have. If I can manage complex financial decisions during chemotherapy, I can certainly handle my own affairs. The judge leaned forward to look at my credit report and bank statements while I explained each document. I pulled out the hospital incident report that Tucker helped me get and held it up for the court. This is the official documentation from the day Peter brought Brooke to my chemotherapy treatment. The report describes their visit as disruptive and inappropriate given the treatment room's family-only policy. It notes that I was visibly upset and distressed after they left. The nurse who filed the report wrote that Peter showed concerning disregard for my well-being, and that bringing his girlfriend to meet me during chemo was cruel and unusual. The report also documents that other patients complained about the disruption, and that security had to be notified. Tucker's signature is on the report as the patient advocate who reviewed the incident. I explained that this report proves Peter's pattern of using my vulnerable moments to hurt and control me. I picked up my phone and pulled up the text messages I'd saved between Peter and Brooke. I read them out loud for the court. Peter wrote to Brooke 2 weeks ago saying I'd be gone soon and they could finally start their real life together. Brooke replied asking if he thought it would be much longer. Peter said the doctors were too optimistic, but nature would take its course. Another message from last week shows Peter telling Brooke that the sooner this is over, the sooner we're free. He wrote that he's tired of pretending to care and just wants to move on with his life. I watched Brooke's face go pale as I read these messages. She hadn't realized I had access to Peter's texts. The judge asked to see my phone and I handed it over, so she could verify the messages were real. I explained my documentation process next and why I started keeping such detailed records. After the treatment room incident when Peter introduced Brooke, I knew he was dangerous and I needed proof of everything. I've kept copies of every document, every bank statement, every medical record. I recorded phone conversations when it was legal to do so in our state. I took screenshots of texts and emails before Peter could delete them. I built this entire case with help from Valerie, who guided me on what evidence would matter in court. I organized everything by date and category so nothing would be lost or confused. This level of planning and organization demonstrates the exact kind of mental clarity and capacity that Peter claims I lack. If my brain was really too damaged to make decisions, I couldn't have assembled this comprehensive case against him. I held up my final piece of evidence and told the court this was the most important thing they'd hear today. I pulled out a small recording device and explained that I recorded a conversation between Peter and his brother 3 weeks ago. I pressed play, and Peter's voice filled the courtroom. He told his brother he's counting down the days until I die, and they discussed how he'd spend the life insurance money. His brother asked if he felt guilty about any of this. Peter laughed and said, "I'm dying anyway, so he might as well benefit from it." He said the cancer is doing his work for him and all he has to do is wait. The recording played for 2 full minutes, and the courtroom went completely silent. Several people looked shocked and disgusted. The judge's expression turned hard and angry as she listened. When the recording ended, I turned it off and set it on the evidence table. Nobody said anything for several long seconds. I looked directly at the judge and told her I'm fighting for my life in 2 ways right now. I'm fighting cancer with chemotherapy and medical treatment. And I'm fighting my husband who wants me to die so he can take my money and be with his girlfriend. I explained that I need the court's protection to make sure I can continue my treatment without Peter interfering or stealing more of my resources. I asked for an emergency protective order to keep him away from me and my medical facilities. I asked for immediate separation of all our finances, so he can't take anything else. I asked for a criminal investigation into his theft and fraud. I told the judge that Peter has already stolen over $48,000 from me and tried to gain control of my medical decisions, so he could stop my treatment. I need the court to protect me so I can focus on surviving cancer instead of fighting off my husband. The judge nodded slowly and made notes while I spoke. She announced a short recess to review all the evidence I'd presented. I stepped down from the witness stand and sat next to Valerie at our table. My hands were shaking and I felt completely drained from reliving everything. Valerie squeezed my shoulder and whispered that I did an amazing job. Across the courtroom, Peter and his lawyer Julian were having a heated whispered conversation. Peter kept gesturing angrily while Julian shook his head and looked through his papers. Brooke sat alone 3 rows back looking pale and scared. She kept glancing at the door like she wanted to run. The 15-minute recess felt like hours. When the judge returned, her expression was stern and focused. She sat down and looked directly at Peter before speaking. She denied his petition for financial control immediately. Her voice was firm as she stated that I've demonstrated exceptional mental capacity, and that Peter's claims are not only unsupported but contradicted by overwhelming evidence. She said the evidence shows Peter has been systematically stealing from me, lying to my family, and attempting to interfere with my medical care. She ordered an immediate freeze on all our joint accounts. She required Peter to provide a full accounting of every penny he's withdrawn from our accounts in the past year. She said if he can't account for the money, she'll assume it was stolen. Peter's face went from pale white to bright red as she spoke. His lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge held up her hand for silence. She continued by granting me an emergency protective order. Peter has to stay at least 500 feet away from me at all times. He can't come to my home, my medical facilities, or anywhere I'm receiving treatment. If he violates this order even once, he'll be arrested immediately. She ordered him to return my grandmother's inheritance money, all $48,000, within 30 days or face contempt of court charges. She also ordered Peter to pay all my legal fees because his frivolous and malicious petition caused me unnecessary expense during a serious health crisis. The judge's final words were that she's referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. She specifically mentioned fraud, theft, forgery, and possible attempted harm given Peter's interference with my medical care. She said Peter's actions constitute financial abuse of a vulnerable person. 2 police officers who'd been standing at the back of the courtroom started walking toward Peter's table as the judge finished speaking. The judge wasn't done. She looked down at her papers and then back up at Peter with an expression that made the whole room go quiet. She said she was referring this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. She listed off the charges she wanted them to look at: fraud, theft, forgery, and possible attempted murder based on Peter's interference with my medical care. Her exact words were that Peter's actions constitute financial abuse of a vulnerable person and possibly attempted manslaughter through medical neglect. The 2 officers who'd been walking toward Peter's table reached him just as she finished. One of them stood right behind his chair while the other positioned himself by the door. Peter's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. His lawyer, Julian, put a hand on his arm like he was trying to keep him from doing something stupid. The judge turned her attention to Brooke next. She looked right at her and said, Brooke may face charges as an accomplice to fraud and theft. She ordered Brooke to preserve all financial records and communications with Peter. She also said Brooke couldn't leave the state. Brooke's practiced crying turned into real sobbing. She stood up and said she didn't know the full extent of what Peter was doing. The judge held up her hand and cut her off mid-sentence. She said ignorance isn't a legal defense and that Brooke should get herself a lawyer. The bailiff had to tell Brooke to sit back down. Everyone in the courtroom was staring at them now. Some people had their phones out like they wanted to record this. The judge gathered her papers and stood up. She told everyone court was adjourned and walked out through the door behind her bench. As soon as she left, the courtroom exploded with noise. People were talking and pointing. Peter tried to stand up, but the officer behind him put a hand on his shoulder and made him sit back down. Valerie grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the exit. We were almost to the door when Peter saw us leaving. He shook off the officer's hand and started walking toward me. He only made it 3 steps before both bailiffs blocked his path. One of them pointed at me and then back at Peter. He was reminding Peter about the protective order that was now in effect. Peter had to stay 500 feet away from me at all times. Peter's face twisted up and he started shouting. He said I was ruining his life. He said he was trying to help me. His voice got louder with each word. He said I was being ungrateful and that I'd regret this. But his words sounded hollow after everything the court just heard. Everyone had seen the evidence. Everyone knew what he'd done. Valerie kept pulling me toward the door while Peter kept shouting behind us. The bailiffs were trying to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. One of the officers who'd been standing by his table came over and said something to him quietly. Peter finally shut up, but he was breathing hard and his hands were shaking. We made it out into the hallway and Valerie walked fast toward the elevator. She kept looking back to make sure Peter wasn't following us. We could still hear him shouting even through the closed courtroom doors. The elevator took forever to arrive. When it finally did, we got in and Valerie pressed the button for the parking garage about 5 times. As the doors closed, I saw the officers leading Peter back into the courtroom. They were taking him to a side room for questioning. We drove to Valerie's office in silence. I was shaking and couldn't make it stop. My hands were trembling. So bad I had to sit on them. Valerie kept glancing over at me while she drove, but she didn't say anything. When we got to her office, she made me sit down and brought me water. She sat across from me and explained that the criminal investigation would take time. She said these cases usually take months to build properly. But she also said the evidence I gathered made prosecution very likely. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing notes. She said Peter could face 5 to 10 years in prison for the theft alone. Then there would be additional charges for the fraud and medical interference. Each charge carried its own sentence and they could stack up. While she was talking, her office phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and her eyes got wide. She answered it and said yes several times. Then she looked at me and mouthed, DA's office. She listened for another minute and then said I was available tomorrow morning. She hung up and told me the district attorney's office wanted to meet with me. They were moving fast on this. They wanted to talk to me within the hour the next day. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Peter's face in the courtroom. The way he'd looked so confident when Brooke was testifying. The way that confidence had drained away as I presented my evidence. The way he'd looked when the officers approached him. The next morning, I met Valerie at the district attorney's office downtown. A detective named Hassan was waiting for us in a conference room. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes. He shook my hand and said this was one of the most calculated cases of spousal abuse he'd seen in his career. He'd been working financial crimes for 20 years, and Peter's scheme was particularly cruel. He opened a folder that was already thick with papers. He said they were building charges for theft, fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy with Brooke. He spread out some of the documents I'd provided and pointed to different sections. He said my documentation made their job much easier. Most victims don't have this kind of evidence. He asked if I was willing to testify, and I said yes immediately. I wanted to make sure Peter couldn't do this to anyone else. Hassan smiled for the first time and said that was exactly what he needed to hear. After the meeting with Hassan, Valerie drove me to my bank. The manager was waiting for us in his office. He'd already gotten the court order to unfreeze my personal accounts. He apologized for not catching the suspicious withdrawals earlier. He said the bank should have flagged them. He pulled up my accounts on his computer and showed me the new ones he'd created. These accounts had only my name on them. Peter couldn't access them or even see they existed. The manager said he was waiving all fees for the next year as an apology. He also said the bank was filing its own fraud report and cooperating fully with the criminal investigation. I signed about 20 different forms. My hand was cramping by the time we finished. But when I left the bank, I had control of my money again. From the bank, I drove to the hospital. Tucker met me in the patient advocate office. He had a stack of papers ready for me to sign. These were updated medical directives that explicitly excluded Peter from any decision-making or information access. Tucker had highlighted everywhere I needed to sign or initial. He explained each form carefully, even though I just wanted to sign everything and be done. When we finished with the paperwork, Tucker walked me down to Dr. Figueroa's office. She was between patients and had a few minutes to talk. She pulled up my file on her computer and showed me the notes she was adding. The notes flagged Peter as a threat and instructed all staff to refuse him any information or access. She said if Peter tried to contact anyone about my care, they were to call security immediately. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt safe continuing my treatment. I didn't have to worry about Peter sabotaging my care or trying to stop my treatment. That evening, my sister Celine called. She'd heard about the court hearing from Valerie. She said she was taking a leave from her job and coming to stay with me. I tried to tell her she didn't need to do that, but she wasn't listening. She said she'd already talked to her boss and packed her bags. She'd be here in 2 days. When Celine arrived, she had a plan. She'd found a small furnished apartment near the hospital. The lease was in her name only so Peter couldn't find me. We spent the weekend moving my stuff from the house. Celine did most of the heavy lifting while I directed from the couch. I was too tired from chemo to help much. The apartment was small, but it felt safe. Celine set up the bedroom for me and took the couch for herself. She said she'd stay through my remaining chemo sessions. Having her there made everything easier. She drove me to appointments and sat with me during treatments. She made sure I ate even when I didn't want to. She watched terrible reality TV with me when I was too tired to do anything else. I realized how much I'd missed having family around during the hardest parts of treatment. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I was at the apartment with Celine when my phone rang. It was Valerie. She said Peter had just been formally arrested. They'd charged him with 15 counts including grand theft, fraud, and attempted interference with medical care. His bail was set at $200,000. The judge considered him a flight risk given the severity of the charges. Valerie said Brooke had been charged too. She was facing charges as an accomplice to fraud and theft for knowingly benefiting from stolen money. Her bail was lower, but she was still looking at serious prison time if convicted. I asked Valerie what happened next, and she said we wait for the trial date. That same afternoon, I got an email from someone at Peter's law firm. The email said the firm had fired Peter immediately after his arrest. They were opening their own investigation into whether he'd misused client funds or company resources. The firm had issued a public statement distancing themselves from his actions. The statement expressed support for my recovery. Over the next few days, several of Peter's colleagues reached out. They sent emails or called saying they were sorry. They said they hadn't seen the signs of his behavior. Some of them said they'd thought something was off, but didn't know what to do. A few offered to testify if it would help the case. A week later, Valerie called with news about the plea deal. The district attorney's office had offered Peter 12 years in prison if he returned all the stolen money and testified against Brooke's involvement. His new lawyer told him to take it because the evidence against him was too strong to fight. But Peter refused. He actually believed he could win at trial and convince a jury he was the victim. Valerie said this was good news for me because it meant everything would come out in a public trial instead of being hidden in a plea agreement. Every text message, every bank record, every lie would be presented to a jury and reported in the news. Peter's refusal to accept reality was going to expose him completely. The next week, I had my scheduled PET scan to check how the cancer was responding to treatment. I lay still in the machine for 40 minutes while it took images of my entire body. Dr. Figueroa called me into her office 2 days later to go over the results. She pulled up the scans on her computer and showed me the before and after images. The tumors had shrunk significantly, and there was no new growth anywhere. She said the treatment was working better than she'd hoped, and my prognosis was looking really good. She told me the stress reduction from resolving the situation with Peter might have actually helped my recovery, because stress can affect how the body responds to treatment. I started crying right there in her office. For the first time since my diagnosis, I actually believed I might survive this. 3 months passed, and I was sitting in the treatment chair for my last round of chemotherapy. Celine held my hand while the nurse hooked up the IV line. Peter's trial was scheduled to start in 4 weeks, and the court had ordered him to return the stolen money through a payment plan. I was making plans for what came after treatment ended. I wanted to go back to the school and maybe travel somewhere I'd never been. I'd survived cancer, and I'd survived Peter's cruelty. Now I had a future that was finally mine to control, a life where I was safe and supported and free. That's my take on it, but I bet you've got a better one. What would you have done differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading through them, like always.